today's a pretty busy day, actually. First of all, Russia and Ukraine are meeting today. So Putin and Zelensky are meeting. It's been first time in 2 years, so that they're meeting and talking about initiating peace talks. A lot of it has before was just talking through other people, but now they're meeting face to face. So we're seeing a little bit of progress there. Apple is planning on opening its plants in India, moving from China to India, which the US government does not like. Immigration officers were saying that Columbia University has been harboring aliens.
Wow.
Yeah, their way of dehumanizing immigrants from Mexico. So, they're saying that Columbia University, again, harbors these illegal aliens. And
that makes sense. Okay, that aliens. I thought you actually meant aliens.
Yeah, it's, the U.S. government is strange and dehumanizing people who just want to have a better life.
Yeah.
And then you have the next issue, which is next matter, is the Trump administration is today at Supreme Court talking about birthright citizenship. So essentially, birthright citizenship is when somebody comes to the States, in this case, if someone is born in the States, they are automatically a citizen of the States. However, Trump wants to change that. So, that kind of brings us to the topic today, which is DEI. And
what is DEI?
Glad you asked that. So basically, DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's DEI initiatives. And so basically what that is the government, or a lot of places really, companies do this too. We have this implemented in our schools, and it's basically just trying to uplift people that are part of minority groups. So we would be us as women of color would be more represented. So how we have a lot of scholarships at school for women and people of color, if you have BSA, SSA. So these are essentially DEI initiatives, because you want to represent, you want to push these people more, because historically speaking, they haven't had that, which we know obviously we were colonized so many times, and we had so much stolen from us. Additionally, apart from what was stolen from us, we also lost a lot in the future, because we're now at a disadvantage when we go out to get hired. Obviously we have a history of colonialism, the British who colonized us and made us into slaves, and then we obviously were considered less than human for a very long time. And it wasn't until the 1960s that black people, for example, were given rights alongside many other people of color. So it hasn't even been 100 years since we've all gained rights. It has barely been 100 years since the suffragette movement, which is women gaining rights. So we're working backwards now. So even
go more on that.
So we have of course we've had a history of DEI initiatives throughout our history. The Ottoman Empire had their own DEI initiatives, obviously didn't call them that, but now what's happening is companies are getting rid of DEI initiatives. They're getting DEI is technically part of their HR department, so they're getting rid of the departments that are in charge of DEI and getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion statements in their company statement, basically saying we don't care about this stuff. And all of them are stating one reason, which is that the Trump administration has been saying that DEI no longer should be implemented. They're stating that, DEI goes against the government and stuff like that.
That makes no sense.
Yeah. How is making the world a more equitable place going against the government? This is a lot about the government.
Yeah.
Trump. And the Trump administration doing a wonderful job with DEI, by getting rid of laws that protected people of color in Louisiana. So there was an education act that they actually got rid of that supported people of color. And Trump said, and I quote, where is this? President Donald Trump recently ordered federal agencies not to enforce laws that prohibit policies and practices with discriminatory impacts. He just said that it's okay if you guys discriminate. Kumbaya, let's all discriminate. So, like, you can be discriminated at your workplace in the States. You can take this to the authorities, take this to HR, and HR is going to be like, or the authorities are going to be like, well, why should we help you? There's no law in place to help you. So, and yeah, there's like been more of a push to get rid of these DEI initiatives. So, and this is even before the Trump administration. There's like so many companies since like starting from July 2024, more and more companies have been getting rid of DEI initiatives. So like, if anything, DEI initiatives for these companies might have just been like a popularity stunt back in like the 2020 like movements when people were all like crazy for BLM, and now that those movements are losing steam a little bit, companies are like, well, let's stop wasting money on this thing, and are just moving on. So now you have Disney, IBM, Google, big companies that we work with on a daily. All of them are like lifting their hands and stepping back, and they're like, we no longer need to do this anymore. They are getting rid of DEI departments, getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion statements in their company statements. That says a lot about what's been happening. Yeah. So, and it's crazy because these are like the biggest companies in the world. They have money to spare to make sure that their companies are an equitable place. They just choose not to, stating that the government is obviously, going against this, which is fair because the government is going against this.
Yeah.
Trump administration does not like DEI initiatives, and it was so crazy because like, oh my god, have you heard about like what happened with Harvard? Like the Harvard?
No.
Okay, so basically like a while ago, Harvard lost $2.2 billion.
2.2 billion?
Yeah, in government funding. And first of all, that's really bad because Harvard is a hub for innovation, the recent developments in all kinds of fields that we focus on. So it's like universities are our research centers. So by getting rid of funding from research centers, if they're competing with China, this is like a bad step. But that's a story for another day. Technically, the reason why Harvard lost $2.2 billion in funding is because the Trump administration said that Harvard is anti-Semitic. So Harvard, alongside Columbia, especially Columbia, they've been targeting Columbia like crazy because these universities, when the Gaza and Israel war broke out, these companies, the students there, these universities, their students protested, and in the midst of their protests, a couple of Jewish students were not essentially attacked. Nobody was like injured, but there were some incidents that took place. And yeah, them were anti-Semitic because of the Israel and Gaza war. However, taking away $2.2 billion in funding is not the way to go about it.
Yeah. And
even the Harvard dean was like, if you want us to, increase like supervision, making sure educating people on anti-Semitism, we are all for that. The dean himself is Jewish. So like, yeah, he's pretty like on that, like he wants that.
Yeah.
However, one of the other reasons that Donald Trump, put in was Harvard is anti-white men. Like, look at the government right now. I don't think the only women I've seen in the government so far, besides the First Lady, who's only been in office 23 days, like, besides her, maybe like the media representative, all of them are white men.
Yeah.
So how are they saying that universities are anti-white men when they're the only ones who can afford to go to university in the first place?
Yeah.
They don't pay people, like colored people, well enough to go to university to begin with. We may be going forward, but we still don't get paid enough, clearly. I mean, you can just look at the wealth, like, distribution in the country. Not just in the States, but in Canada as well. Like, if, the billionaires didn't have so much money and we had so little, like, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be in this horrible situation today.
Yeah.
But, again, this issue really stems from a lot of other matters. You have a lot of, like, DEI can really go into classism and sexism and racism, because that's what they all contribute to. A lot of people of color, a lot of women are lower on the scale of, like, how much they earn. 7 to 8% of Forbes 500, like, are women or people of color. So, needless to say, there's very little representation. So, again, DEI initiatives, these are extremely important because we as people of color and women of color, we need that representation in these places. We've already been marginalized for so long and we need to be pushed more. We need to be, and not because it's to choose the person who's like more qualified, like, or choose a person of color over someone who's more qualified, because so many studies show that like people of color are, even though they're more qualified, are still less likely to be hired. So it's not about qualifications, because if it was about qualifications, we would have more of an equitable world. Because it's never been that we don't work hard or that we don't have the qualifications. It's obviously inherent, like, systemic racism and sexism. To summarize, DEI initiatives are important, and Trump doesn't like them. And now we must be asking, why does Trump not like them?
Yeah.
Fun fact, he likely is very racist and is likely very sexist.
Yeah. But can I ask a question really quick?
Yeah.
Could you go more about like the historical reasoning for the DEI?
Yeah. So, like, DEI, again, has existed for a very long time. And, like, this goes back to, like, even before we were colonized. Like, if you look at one of the biggest empires we've ever had, the Ottoman Empire. The reason why the Ottoman Empire lasted so long was, and we still actually see the Ottoman Empire today.
Really?
Yeah, we still have like remnants of the Ottoman Empire in Asia. And the reason why it lasted so long was, and this is one thing that Genghis Khan did really well in his ruling, was that he had it so that nobody was discriminated against in their religion, in their color, their race, their gender identity. I mean, his daughters were often rulers of lands.
That's, wow.
Yeah. So Genghis Khan, we like him. Yeah. So, and that was just like a bit of a, kind of shows you that his rule was good because he was really for DEI initiatives, because they may not have been called that back in the day, but DEI initiatives is just a way to ensure that people are all free to be who they are.
Yeah.
So free to be who they are without fearing discrimination in any way, shape, or form. So translating that from like hundreds and hundreds of years ago to today, where our world is increasingly more globalized and we have more like all sorts of people. So we're back to our recent colonialism when the British took everything. Yay!
Woohoo!
So obviously they colonized India and they colonized a lot of Africa. So we can obviously focus on Africa a lot more because they were the most heavily impacted by colonialism. Yes, we lost $18 trillion, but we still are somewhat more stable compared to Africa, considering that a lot of people living in Africa were obviously shipped off to the States and Canada as slaves. And then eventually, thank God, they fought for their rights and they eventually earned those. But even back then, even though they were freed from slavery, doesn't mean they were freed from discrimination. So they still had to suffer a lot of discrimination when they would go out to find a job. There was a lot of lynching. So, like, you know, that meant that a lot of people of color were attacked just for doing nothing. It was illegal to loiter, which essentially means it's illegal to walk down the road with no purpose.
That makes no sense. Okay.
Yeah. So, it was, like, needless to say, it was, like, very discriminatory. And I mean, talk about the KKK. Yeah, like, the KKK, which Trump actually supports. Yeah, he's had, like, there have been, like, signs of his connections to KKK. This is the guy who runs the biggest world superpower, by the way, supports the KKK, which supports...
Do you want to go a little bit more about what the KKK is really quick?
KKK is a white supremacist cult, essentially, and they were formed, like, in the 19th century, and it was obviously a form of discriminating against people of color. They did not like people of color, so a lot of their stuff included, like, killing people of color, and But you come to the 1960s and people are becoming more and more accepting. And this is after World War II as well. After World War II, we had like the World Wars period. We had like a boom in like rights, people fighting for their rights, and that's when we had the suffragette movement, because men were off to war, so who's left to do all the work? Women. So the Equal Pay Act came in the 1960s, and essentially ensured that people, no matter their color or race, gender, just basically intersectional identity, would not be discriminated against when getting hired, when getting paid. They would not be paid less or more based on their identity, essentially. So again, 1960s, Black people fought for their rights and got their rights, and that was one of the first signs that we had of DEI initiatives. Or honestly, even the suffragette movement was a DEI initiative, because it was a way of having more equity. Because again, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Keywords: diversity, equity, and inclusion. So suffragette movement was a sign of equity. Maybe not diversity to a certain extent, but you do have women in the field, and including women. And then you have the same with the 1960s Equal Pay Act, and eventually companies just kind of took this, or governments and organizations took this, and they kind of really implemented it into their organizations, which is good, because as minorities and people who've been marginalized for a very long time, we really want that representation. If anything, it's pretty basic in a lot of countries to have these. It's oftentimes some companies are if you don't have a person of color, if you don't have a woman on your board team, on your board members, then we won't invest in your company. Which is good to a certain extent. Of course, everyone on the board, I hope, works hard, but it is good because then you have more representation in these companies, and that's kind of what you want. So then, yes, you have these organizations, and these governments, and they're let's have DEI, let's have more grants for people who are part of certain communities because they are marginalized. So more scholarships, and opportunities for us. Again, ESA, SSA, we have scholarships that are for us.
For universities, etc.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So these are all DEI initiatives, and now people want to get rid of them. So, relating it back to what I was saying earlier, Trump administration doesn't like that anymore. With the whole Harvard thing, saying it's anti-white men, and there's a lot of people who have been saying that DEI initiatives are anti-white men, feeling that they are left behind with DEI initiatives. When the truth of the matter is we, the marginalized people, have been the ones who have always been left behind, and now we wish to not be left behind, and we wish to be at the equal playing ground. White men are still not left behind, but
we're just equaling up to them in a sense.
Yeah, we're leveling the playing field.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be 23% of white men are more likely to get a call back from a company rather than a person of color or a woman, because the only driving factor is that they're a white man. Even though there's absolutely nothing to prove that a white man is more superior to people of color or women in any way whatsoever. As for DEI initiatives, one really good thing about them is that the only reasoning that the only reason why the Trump administration has been saying that DEI initiatives are bad is because he's saying it's a waste of resources. Which, as a president, is crazy to say, because you're essentially saying that supporting your people is a waste of resources.
Yeah.
But I guess that goes without saying, considering he's fired 2,000 people since the beginning of his presidency.
Yeah.
And they're saying that DEI initiatives are stopping the most skilled person from being hired, which is not true. DEI initiatives drive a company's profit. They drive their productivity. So, we really like DEI initiatives, not just for us, but for a lot of the companies that do implement them. They usually do much better than companies that don't. So it's crazy that all these companies that care so much about profit are now taking it back, even after seeing the science behind it. People of color have just always been left behind. It's not because they're underqualified. In fact, I can probably give you a couple of statistics as well. Companies that implement DEI are more profitable by 36%, more innovative by 20%, have better decision making by 30%, and reduce business risks by 30%. So basically, companies that do implement DEI are 29% more likely to achieve above average profitability. And again, DEI initiatives are said to be anti-white men, when white men hold the most authority in the world and the most like leadership positions in the world. Because another thing that Trump said, and I quote, is he complained about racial discrimination in higher education, suggesting universities were increasingly hostile to white students, and he vowed to open civil rights investigations into schools that promoted diversity.
What?
Like, that is not a sentence I was expecting to say out loud. Oh, and there's like this really interesting case, like how Northwestern University hired, they like offered a white man a position, but then instead they rejected him and offered a woman a position. And then this other guy, completely unrelated, was also an anti-abortionist. This same guy kind of like went to Northwestern, and like Northwestern University, which is one of the biggest universities in the States, and said, well, you guys are discriminatory because you guys aren't hiring white men. And mind you, the two white men that they rejected, both of them were like completely fine about it. They didn't even ask this guy to go and make that lawsuit. So this guy's just kind of doing it off his like own thing, I guess like pro bono case or something. I don't even know. Like, he is saying that like, oh, the people that you hired are not as qualified, and you're doing this because of DEI initiatives. Again, the two people who were the candidates, the two white men who were candidates, were completely fine with it. Both go on to have very successful careers elsewhere, but just at Northwestern University, they hired people of color, they hired women. And you know what's like really crazy is the fact that they were saying like, oh, these white men, they weren't getting positions and this is discrimination. But when people of color and women weren't getting those positions, they didn't say anything for us.
Yeah.
And the only voices that we're hearing is the Trump administration, the Republicans. Like, have you heard of a single activist speaking in favor of DEI? Yeah. Like you'll hear people being outraged, but there's no one up there, you know, that's like at that level at the Trump administration who's like, well, this is not right. And one, voices are being suppressed. The only voices we're hearing is that of the Trump administration. We aren't really hearing anyone speaking in favor of DEI, or if they are, they're more like, you know, someone you'll see on social media and stuff, not someone who has a substantial position to actually be able to say something. And I mean, you could actually, you could see that today when the Ben and Jerry's co-founder, barged into the room when RFK was doing a hearing and was dragged out. And CNN was reporting this, and it was only because someone in a substantial position of power, Ben and Jerry's co-founder, was in that situation. But when you have that happening with a normal person, you're not going to hear about that. Yeah. You're not going to hear about the many, many protests that are actually happening in the U.S. right now that we're just not hearing about because a lot of the media that we see today is controlled. I mean, like, look at the presidential, media in itself. Literally, the Associated Press, which is the press that the president gets, a lot of CNN, New York Times, these are all the people that you're going to see there. But a lot of these people have now no longer been able to go to the president and ask them questions because it's part of the way of, like, for the public to kind of find out what is the president doing, what is he up to, and that's the point of the Associated Press, for the people to find out. But when you only have conservative news outlets going and, you know, reporting these issues, then, like, obviously you're going to get a skewed view of what's happening. You're going to get, oh my god, fun fact, Donald Trump is doing some amazingly horrible thing this week. So, but we love Republicans. Let's get rid of immigrants, illegal aliens, when all of these people just came to the States to have a better life. And you're not really hearing of, like, people like us who obviously are in favor of DEI initiatives. It's, like, extremely vital to our livelihood. Yeah. You know, you need to be able to make money to survive in this capitalistic society. We can't do that if, you know, we're getting discriminated when we're trying to survive in said capitalistic society.
So now, since we've talked about that, is there something we can do to make this better, like a solution in a sense? So, in Canada, luckily, we aren't experiencing as much of this issue. In the States, let's first focus on the States before we focus on us. Yeah. So, in the States, like, voters really need to stand up. Yes, one person's vote doesn't count, but a lot of people's votes, those count. Yeah. Pardon me. So when you have, like,
one of the running contenders for the next Democratic Party leader is AOC. So, you know Ms. Cortez?
Yes.
We love AOC.
Love her.
Yeah, New York State's representative. A lot of people are pushing for her to become the next Democratic leader. So, yes, she's a little bit farther left than other Democratic leaders who are more center-left. It's really up to voters to vote for someone who would represent them, but also someone who they know would stand up for them. AOC, even though she's more further left, she still is someone, she's still a woman of color, and she still is someone who would stand up for these DEI initiatives that are getting taken away. And of course, in New York State, things are probably a lot better, where companies and universities, and NYU literally said, and a lot of the New York State education said, you guys can take away our funding, but we aren't going to get rid of our DEI initiatives. As a company, companies should also need to understand that DEI initiatives are important. So us as people, we are the ones who need the DEI initiatives. So the most that we can do is protest, raise awareness, like you have a voice, and like there's a lot that we can do to make change. Again, whether it's protesting, social media, talking to the right people, using our power as voters to have the right person in power to represent us, having the right person to not take away our livelihoods. That would be one of our like major solutions, because this is an issue that stems from the government, like companies that are following suit from what the government is saying. So when you look at the root of the problem, which is the government, that is somewhere where we can make change. Even though we may not be able to make change in private organizations, in the government, that is where we have power. That is where we can vote, and again, change the person in power to represent us. So heavy emphasis on that.
Talking about Canada, anything Canada has related to it?
So Canada, when it comes to American companies with Canadian branches, Canada can't take it in their own hands and be like, we will continue to have DEI initiatives. I think it's Deloitte. The U.S. like branch, they said that they're not going to do the DEI initiatives anymore, but the UK branch was firmly against that, and so they were going to continue to do DEI initiatives, and they were going to keep their diversity, their DEI like statements in their companies, in the UK branch's company statement. So in that sense, again, us, like if we were to just say you and me, realistically, there's not a lot of power that we have there.
Yeah.
We can protest, vote, and be in companies that support DEI initiatives. Maybe don't be in an American company. We need to raise our own voices and educate ourselves on the problem. And raise awareness that people, like you're in the U.S. especially, where they're facing these problems, like people need to understand that whatever's happening to them is an issue stemming from a long history of colonialism, and that DEI initiatives are vital to an increasingly globalized and diverse world, and we cannot function without them. We need to continue these DEI initiatives until we have the leveled playing field. So, yeah, DEI initiatives are important.
Very important.
And with that, we conclude this episode of our podcast.
Yes.
Thank you for joining me, Kirby.
Me, Hammy.
For our podcast today. Yeah!
Anyways, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Peace.